Trump press secretary Karoline Leavitt, aka Lion Leavitt, became visibly triggered during her latest White House press briefing at multiple points. But she got particularly pissed towards the end, where she had a heated back and forth with a reporter about Donald Trump's censorious instincts, prompting her to storm off stage in rage and end the briefing. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, Karoline Leavitt is at it again. I'm going to play actually the last part first, okay, because it's such a beautiful insight into Lion Leavitt's entire worldview. She can't handle any pushback whatsoever from the press, who call her and her boss out for their bad faith dishonesty and their censorious impulses.
On the domestic side, you were just asked about the First Amendment rights issues. In the president's comments yesterday, though, he just said protesters would be strongly dealt with. In your list before, you referred to insurrectionists, rioters, and protesters together. Obviously, they're quite different from your earlier answer. I'm struck by the fact that the president has not at any point said the most important thing here is to protect the First Amendment rights of peaceful protesters. So I'm wondering, where in his hierarchy of interests does he place that? Is the First Amendment protection the most important? Is stopping violence most important? Why is he not out saying all peaceful protesters will be protected?
I think two things can be important at the same time. And the president, as I just answered, supports the right of Americans to peacefully protest. He supports the First Amendment. But that is not the majority of the behavior that we have seen taking place in Los Angeles. We have seen mobs of violent rioters and agitators assaulting law enforcement officers, assaulting our federal immigration authorities. And we have seen, as I said, this goes back to what this administration is trying to do and accomplish, and that's enforcing law and order in our nation's communities. And it's removing public safety threats from communities in Los Angeles.
You're saying the majority have not been peaceful, the majority have been violent.
I just read for you the arrest numbers. We've arrested nearly 400 illegal aliens alone, just illegal aliens who have been arrested in these riots since June 6th, since they began.
Thousands of people on the streets.
Yeah, and we've had hundreds of people who have assaulted law enforcement officers. Are you saying that that's that's appropriate behavior?
No,
Are you
no,
saying
I'm not
that
saying
the
that at all.
president
I'm
shouldn't
just
take
trying
action?
to figure out.
The Democrat governor and the Democrat mayor of Los Angeles have failed their citizens. And the majority of Americans, the majority of Californians, do not want to see law enforcement officers being assaulted in the streets. And thankfully, the president took action and stepped in to protect our federal law enforcement agents, to protect federal buildings, to protect the federal mission of deporting illegal criminals off of our streets. And that mission will continue every day as far as we're concerned. Thank you, guys.
Damn, she was pissed. She was so pissed that she was fumbling over her words. And listen, again, I've said this before and I'll say this again. There's no doubt that Karoline Leavitt is talented. She is the best White House press secretary that Donald Trump has had in the worst possible way, right? She is the most effective at her nefarious job, but she can't handle any sort of pushback. And even there, like her reasons, when she claims the majority of the protesters were violent and a majority of the protests were violent. And so the reporter pushed back, well, wait, really? There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of protesters all throughout Los Angeles. Yeah, well, we've had hundreds of people. Even if we take you at face value and say that there have been hundreds of violent offenders, that still constitutes a minority. What the hell are you talking about, right? So she's just, per usual, Lion Leavitt, wrong on the facts, lying about the facts, but pissed and totally incapable of receiving any sort of pushback with any sort of degree of poise and decorum, the way that, for example, former Biden press secretary Jen Psaki did. But that wasn't the only moment. That was at the very end, and she cut it off short, grabbed her papers, stormed off stage. There was an earlier point in the conversation as well where she lashed out at a reporter for asking a perfectly reasonable question on similar grounds.
The president warned that any protests on Saturday would be met with force. Can you clarify what kind of protest President Trump does support or find acceptable?
The president absolutely supports peaceful protests. He supports the First Amendment. He supports the right of Americans to make their voices heard. He does not support violence of any kind. He does not support assaulting law enforcement officers who are simply trying to do their job. It's very clear for the president what he supports and what he does not. Unfortunately for for Democrats, that line has not been made clear, and they've allowed this unrest and this violence to continue, and the president has had to step in.
One question. So if there were peaceful protests on Saturday for the military parade, President Trump would allow that?
Of course the president supports peaceful protests. What a stupid question. Raquel.
Thank you so much.
What a stupid question. No, that's a perfectly reasonable question, asshole. That's a perfectly reasonable question. Donald Trump has never been the sort of person to tolerate dissent of any kind. My God, he asked his former defense secretary, Mark Esper, during the protests in 2020, if protesters could be shot in the leg. This is not a man who tolerates dissent, especially when the dissent is aimed at him. And of course, this is all in reference to Donald Trump's ridiculously authoritarian tin pot dictatorship-esque military parade on Saturday, which just so happens to be his birthday. And reportedly, military officers are going to parachute in, troops are going to parachute in and present him with a special birthday flag. We're going to talk about that in a separate video. Super gross, super un-American, totally Donald Trump. And yes, it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, and she has a totally unreasonable response. Here's another clip.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I have two questions, if that's okay. First, a few Republicans on Capitol Hill are suggesting that President Trump scale back deportations, even as ICE is reportedly gearing up for raids in 5 more Democrat-led areas. Would anything dissuade President Trump, and would he consider sending in Marines if anti-ICE violence occurs in these cities?
Well, I think I may have just answered both of your questions with my opening monologue. The Trump administration is going to continue the mass deportation effort that the president promised the American public. Many of you were at those rallies in cities and communities across the country when the president spoke about his commitment to removing violent illegal criminals and anyone who has broken our nation's immigration laws from American communities. And God bless our ICE and Border Patrol who are working hard on that effort. This administration is going to continue that. And
Thank you so much, Caroline.
Yeah, so again, it's just Donald Trump is not going to let off the accelerator at all. And apparently, he's no longer going to be focusing on violent offenders, which is something that the American people were assured. And that's why we're hearing reports of so many Trump supporters and Trump voters expressing regret, like, oh, holy shit, I didn't realize he was going to go after undocumented immigrants that I liked. I thought he was only going to go after the violent offenders, which is something Trump allowed them to believe at various points. But now, of course, he's changing his tune under the direction, of course, of Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who's the real architect behind this particular immigration pogrom. Here's another clip.
Thank you. And on another topic, President Trump has indicated that aides to former President Biden who used the Autopen to sign major orders and pardons should be investigated for potential crimes. Does he think that Biden allowing or at least being negligently unaware of this activity was an impeachable offense?
I haven't heard the president address whether it's an impeachable offense, but it could perhaps be a criminal offense, especially on behalf of staffers who may have been utilizing the president's signature without his authority or consent. I understand that Republicans on the Hill are moving in the right direction to call attention to this and to bring in some former White House staffers who clearly knew more than they ever shared and never addressed with the American public. And so we look forward to seeing where this investigation continues. And I know the Department of Justice is also looking into the matter as well.
So there you have it. Republicans are doing a full court press both in the legislative branch and in the executive branch under the Justice Department, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi, to try to invalidate various aspects of President Biden's administration that they don't like on the grounds that somehow Biden was mentally incapacitated, for which they have no evidence. They've offered no evidence, established no evidence whatsoever. Jake Tapper's book. Well, Jake Tapper's book in its very first pages, effectively tells Republicans, hey, if you're looking for evidence that Joe Biden was crippled with senility, this is not your book. Okay, so again, no evidence whatsoever that Biden was too incompetent to sign executive orders or that the Autopen was somehow invalid. Presidents have used Autopen for centuries to sign executive orders and pardons and other things as well. Previous presidential administrations have upheld the use of the Autopen for decades as being lawfully binding, but this is something that they want to hammer and run with it. And this is another reason why if Democrats ever get back into power, they should also demagogue the hell out of issues that make Republicans particularly vulnerable. And there should be all sorts of forensic investigations into the Trump administration and Donald Trump and his family.
Caroline. The president said yesterday that paid insurrectionists were behind or involved in the protests in Los Angeles. Does the White House have any more details about who they believe is paying these protesters?
The president spoke about this last night when he returned from Fort Bragg, because frankly the president has a lot of common sense. And if you look at some of the imagery that we have received from the Department of Homeland Security and ICE and law enforcement who are on the ground, you will see boxes and boxes of very professionalized masks and rioting equipment being dropped off for these protesters. So it's a good question the president is raising, and one we are looking into, about who is funding these insurrectionists and these rioters and these protesters and these illegal criminals. And I have
So again, no evidence whatsoever that any rioters have been funded in any way unlawfully. There's no law, as far as I'm aware, against providing masks to protesters or outfits or anything else. So again, they cite no law. They offer no evidence other than they just assume that, oh, the only way you can oppose Donald Trump is if you are effectively bribed to do so. So again, it would help if perhaps they presented evidence to corroborate claims, but this is the Trump administration. They feel that they're not beholden to such standards. Here's another clip.
Thank you, Caroline. About Elon Musk, he issued an apology this morning. Has the president accepted the apology, or does he think it's too little too late?
The president acknowledged the statement that Elon put out this morning, and he is appreciative of it, and we are continuing to focus on the business of the American people.
And has the administration started a review of Musk's government contracts, something that the president said he's considering?
What do you mean by that?
Has the administration started a review of the contracts that Musk and his companies currently have?
No efforts have been made on that front, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Thank you.
So who knows what will happen between Donald Trump and Elon Musk? It's entirely possible, again, that they will reconcile, but also they don't shut out of hand the notion of investigating Elon Musk's corruption and reopening investigations into him and potentially reviewing and abolishing the contracts and subsidies that he has with the federal government, all of which to settle a grievance with Musk would be pretty corrupt. I totally support the notion of, number one, investigating Elon Musk as the federal government was doing until Musk came in and effectively destroyed those things. And I also support rescinding his various contracts and subsidies, but Donald Trump didn't support that until until Musk pissed Trump off. And then and only then was Trump open to it. So that seems like a corrupt abuse of power. Typical Trump. One last clip.
Sure. Over the weekend, Secretary Noem sent a memo to the Pentagon asking Secretary Hegseth to have and direct the military that's on the ground in LA to arrest and detain what she said were lawbreakers. Is the president okay with that? And under what authority would the members of the military be able to arrest people inside the United States?
I can't speak for a letter that came from the Department of Homeland Security. I can't speak for the president and what's currently happening on the ground now. And as you know, the president federalized the National Guard under U.S. Code 10, which he has the authority to do. And our United States Marines and the National Guardsmen and women who are on the ground right now are helping to create a peaceful environment for ICE and Border Patrol, who were being, again, hailed with rocks, who were being violently and viciously attacked. They needed reinforcements, and so our United States Marines who are on the ground are providing those reinforcements to ensure the environment is peaceful so that these raids and deportations can continue.
But he realizes they can't actually arrest people unless he invokes the Insurrection Act, which, I mean, seemingly was not something that was in Secretary Noem's memo, a clear distinction she did not make there.
Again, you're trying to conflate a letter that was sent to the Department of Homeland Security to the president's legal authority. The president understands the legal authority that he invoked, and that's the current situation right now.
When it comes to federalizing the national...
Yeah, so there you go. A great point by Caitlin Collins. Like the idea, as Trump and members of the Trump administration have talked about using the military to arrest people. Again, that would violate posse comitatus, which is a 150-year-old piece of legislation which effectively forbids the use of the military for domestic law enforcement purposes. And the only way really around that would be invoking the Insurrection Act. And Donald Trump seemingly hasn't done it. And he keeps going back and forth as to whether this constitutes an insurrection in the first place. But you can see that Karoline Leavitt is pissed to be fact-checked in this way and to know that the Department of Homeland Security seems to be getting over its skis and tripping Trump up as well. There you have it, another disastrous press conference by Lion Leavitt, a.k.a. Karoline Leavitt. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.